Hello. Welcome back, everyone. Today I just wanted to sit down and talk you through how I moved to Seoul for a couple of months, 3 to 4 months, and what the process was like, especially since I had to go through the 14-day quarantine and everything, and I think that might go away with vaccines, but it looks like for the near future that will still stay. Hopefully you will find this helpful if you're looking to move to Seoul in the near future, but hopefully you can also find some tips on how to navigate finding an Airbnb or finding things to do, just all those things that have to do with coming to Seoul, either for tourism or for work or for anything in between. Just for some context, I am a college student at Princeton on a gap year. So I finished my first year and then we realized everything was going to be online for another year, and I decided to take the year off. I have been in Seoul since mid-March. It is now early May, and I will be here till either late June or late July, we'll see. I am currently actually here with my boyfriend, and we are staying at an apartment that you can see that we found on Airbnb, and it is located in Hongdae, which is one of the, I would say, most popular and up-and-coming kind of areas in Seoul, and I've really enjoyed it here. Just to clarify, I am not working during this time, so I do remote work through tutoring students online. I don't have a job in Korea, not an intern or anything like that, so most of my day is free other than the few hours that I tutor each week. So I think I'm going to go about this video in about 3 parts, which the first one being preparation, just how I got ready to come to Korea, some things that you might want to know from my personal experience, and then arrival, so what happens when you get here, especially the airport and all the quarantine stuff. And then the third part just being how to plan a trip or just a longer trip in Korea, how to find things to do, maybe some tips for navigation, all that fun stuff. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is preparing to come to Korea, and I know that this is my personal experience, so I don't want to project it onto anyone else and say this is the only way, and also you will see that I was in a very particular situation. Before anything, I loosely just had the idea that I wanted to go to Seoul during my gap year because of the COVID situation here was so much better, and I'm also Korean American, so most of my family lives here, and I'm decently familiar with Seoul, and so I thought it would be a great idea. I kept it on the back burner while I was at home during my gap year. For a little bit, it seemed like it wasn't gonna work out because the cases were getting worse and all this other complicated stuff, and then 2021 came around and I put it on my New Year's resolutions, manifestations, whatever you want to call it. I was like, I'm going to Korea no matter what. Either in the spring or the summer, I'm gonna make it happen. And here we are. So the first thing, I started planning in terms of funding pretty early on. So I've been tutoring and doing internships throughout my gap year, and I was saving money for the trip, and I'm still earning money while I'm here through tutoring. It really depends on what you're looking for in terms of an Airbnb or a hotel, or how long you're gonna be here, or the quarantine experience, or the flights in terms of what time you come. But I estimated my trip cost to be hopefully around $5,000 to $7,000. So it's a big range, but it's including flights, Airbnb, daily expenses, and we are seemingly on track. So that is kind of where I put myself at, and I tried to plan in terms of how much I was going to earn while I was in Korea, as well as how much I should earn before. I tried to plan that all ahead of time, so I would definitely recommend just loosely sketching out how much the trip might cost. And then the next thing that I want to talk about, which is the only thing that is really important to start early on if you are going to do it, is a visa. So if you are an American citizen, you will be able to stay in Seoul or South Korea for up to 90 days without any visa. You don't need anything else, you just need a self-quarantine. For me, I wanted to stay longer than that, and so I decided to apply for a visa. Korean visas right now, to my knowledge, are not that easy to get because obviously international travel is being restricted. So there might be student visas, there might be working visas. In my case, and again, this is very particular to me and maybe other people like me, I am a Korean American. My parents are Korean citizens. I was a Korean citizen until a year ago. And so I was able to apply for the F-4 visa, which is basically for descendants of Korean heritage. If your parents are Korean, if you are Korean, there's ways around to find a way to get this visa. It's a visa that's active for 2 years, so you can stay up to 2 years in Seoul consecutively, and you don't need a promise to work, anything like that. There are a few requirements that I would definitely look through before applying. But in terms of like which visa I was going to apply for, that was the only one I was eligible for. So if you're eligible for it, I would say it's a relatively easy process for a visa anyway. But you do want to get started early. So for the F-4 visa, I would look online just to check the requirements again, but you need to get a fingerprinting to get a background check from the FBI. Then you need to get that background check. You need to send it back to the American government so they can check that it is a legitimate background check. And then once you get that, then you can gather that as well as two passport photos, your visa applications and all this stuff, and go to the nearest embassy or consulate, I think, near you. Mine was in Houston, which is a 3-hour drive from where I live, but it was still worth it to go and apply, and then they'll send you the visa. You can either pick it up at the embassy or they'll send it to you by mail within, I would say, a business week. It took me about from October 2020 to February 2021 to complete the process, and I left in March 2021. And I think part of it was definitely my own delay, because at certain points I wasn't sure if I was actually going to go through with the whole Korea travel thing. However, the part where you submit your background check and they are checking it to make sure it's a real background check, very confusing. It's called an apostille, I think. That took, I would say, about 3 months from the US government. Classic. But yes, so I would just give yourself a lot of time ahead of time to get all those required documents. Don't crunch it, because the US government, you don't know how long it's going to take. If it's a holiday season, it's going to take even longer. As of COVID, they don't allow you to come in. They don't really allow you to call. So it really just like is up to them. So I would start maybe like, 3, 4, 5, the longer the better, months in advance, and just get all those documents in if you are applying for a visa. Okay, so after you've secured the visa, then you're probably thinking flights, Airbnb, hotels, like where am I gonna stay? For flights, on skyscanner.com, you can put in a price range or I think a lower price limit that you want, and it'll tell you every day that how the price fluctuates. And so maybe if you think like this is exorbitant, like this is really high, then if you wait a little bit, it might get lower. Obviously, if it's pretty close to your flight, then you might want to just purchase earlier, because earlier is usually better in terms of prices. But it'll tell you the best option, and then you can move from there to get your flight. So for Airbnbs, for me personally, and anyone with a visa or who is a Korean citizen or has Korean family, you can self-quarantine not in a Korean government facility. You can quarantine in maybe an apartment that your family has, your family home, or you can quarantine in an Airbnb. So I started looking just for quarantine Airbnb separately from my Airbnb that I would stay for when I was actually active in the trip. The easiest way I would say to go about it is just look for spaces that are slightly spacious, have usually some natural light. I think those are really important for quarantine, just for your mental health. Maybe a window. I would say a window is pretty crucial. Decently easy to get to from the airport, since you don't want to be super hectic and like lose your way or anything like that first day when you're going into quarantine. But other than that, I wouldn't be too discouraged if it doesn't say like self-quarantine's allowed on the Airbnb listing. You can usually message the owners of the Airbnb and just ask if you can self-quarantine in the Airbnb, and a lot of people will say yes, and some people will say no. For me, I ended up doing an Airbnb near Hongdae as well, but it doesn't really matter because you're just inside. It was really great. It was definitely a little bit more lived in, but it was about $600 for the Airbnb total for 2 weeks, which is really, really unbeatable, and I thought it was worth it because facility quarantine, which my boyfriend had to do, was about $1,600. And so comparatively with lodging, I think I really lucked out. So I first secured that quarantine space, and then looking for an Airbnb to stay in for the rest of the trip. I would say the key is just to be patient. First time I was looking at Airbnbs, I got really nervous because they would just go so fast when I got attached to a space. But actually it took about, I would say, 2 weeks of constant searching to find the space we're in now, which I think is definitely the best place we could have gotten in retrospect. So don't panic if places seem to be flying away. Like, there are so many places in Seoul that you can stay, and the perfect one is out there. It just takes a while for you to find it. So I would just continue looking up Airbnb Seoul, put in neighborhoods, preferably I would say in Gangnam or Hongdae, which seem to be kind of the main areas that young foreigners or young people stay in general, and also are really well just like located in terms of transport wherever you want to go. Yeah, I would just say the key is to be patient, keep looking, don't give up on your price range, and I think something hopefully will come about. So at the current moment, the Korean government still mandates that you get a COVID PCR test negative result in 72 hours before your departure. So it's actually, you don't have to take the test 72 hours before. I got very confused about this. You just need the result 72 hours before. So with the American system, most tests do come back, PCR tests do come back in 1 to 2 days, but I don't know, I was very nervous. It's a big trip. I didn't want to put all my faith in CVS. I actually ended up paying for my entire COVID PCR test at a private clinic, the same day turnaround guarantee. And I would honestly recommend it just for the peace of mind, but obviously there are ways to get it at more reasonably priced places. Just know that, yeah, you need to have the printed out negative result when you get onto your flight. We've arrived at Incheon Airport. What happens next? So I flew from San Francisco to Incheon. It was about, I would say, 13 hours. Flight was very empty. In my case, it might be more full now. And it was also a night flight, which I would definitely recommend because I was able to sleep through most of it. And when you have to keep a mask on for 13 hours, I think it's just good psychologically to just sleep for most of it where you're not thinking about it and fidgeting. Once you arrive, you'll have certain procedures that they walk you through pretty easily. The first one is just getting your temperature checked and asking about your COVID symptoms. This was very interesting. So I was a little flustered and very nervous during this. I don't know why. So they took my temperature and I was the border temperature. I think it's 37.5. It's the border temperature now for like the max. And if you're over that, then they send you to get immediately COVID tested, and that's another like 24-hour process in the airport. So the man was nice to me and he let me kind of cool down and just like relax for a bit before taking my temperature again. But I would just, maybe take some deep breaths before that moment or something, because if you do, if you run hot or something, your temperature tests above, then you are kind of screwed for the next like day or so in terms of waiting at the airport. And so after you get through that safely, then they'll walk you through to a different station, where this is also a crucial point in the trip, where they will call a Korean contact that you have to make sure that they know that you are arriving and they know where you are quarantining. This is very important. Make sure that you have a Korean contact number, whether that's someone from your work or university or family or friends. Just someone that can say, yes, I can vouch for this person. I know that they're here. For me, in my case, we landed at 4:30 a.m. and my grandma was awake. And so she saved all of us because every other contact person was sleeping. They will call at 4:30 a.m. So just let your contact person know when your arrival time is. But once you get through that safely, then you should go through the normal kind of immigrations, customs. You'll have to keep showing your PCR test. Then they'll give you a set of other documents that you'll show along the way, but it's relatively easy and self-explanatory. And then you'll get through to baggage claim, get your bags, and from there they'll split up people who are doing facility quarantine into a bus waiting room, and then the bus will come and take you wherever. And for people who are doing self-quarantine, you'll be directed to the taxis and buses on the other side. And so that's what I did. I was able to get a taxi very quickly, and it was about, I think it's a flat rate, I could be totally wrong. I think it's a flat rate of 70,000 won to get to Seoul. So once you are in quarantine, and I'm going to speak mostly for self-quarantine here, there are some tips I have just to get things delivered, just to stay sane. The two apps/websites that I would recommend are Gmarket and Shuttle. And I'm guessing that many people have talked about this if you've been watching multiple videos like this for foreigners or people who don't have Korean cards or Korean phone numbers. Shuttle is a food delivery service from restaurants that works with a foreign card as well as a foreign phone number. So if you want to get, Korean food delivered, or there's literally everything on there, pizza, chicken, like anything. If you want food delivered to you during quarantine, that's a great app to use if you don't have a number yet. If you do have a Korean number, then I would recommend 배달의 민족, Baemin, which is the Korean app, and you just have to have a Korean number for that one, but not a Korean card. You can pay when you meet them when they bring you the food. Gmarket I used a lot for groceries, so in terms of cereal, fruits and veg, rice, I'm trying to think, like other kind of like instant ramen, like things like that. I used Gmarket, and they will get things delivered to you probably within 1 to 2 business days. So it came really quickly. I was able to cook because I had my own kitchen, and I actually think that sustained a lot of my mental health, just being able to cook during quarantine. So I would recommend those 2 things. The other things are just kind of more general. Come prepared with a show you want to watch, a book you want to read, you know, exercise pretty regularly, which is what I did. And I think actually the 2 weeks went by a lot faster than I expected. I called a lot of friends and family during that time. And I would also say that the way to make quarantine go by faster is also to get excited for what's to come, which is all your glorious life after you get out of quarantine. So actually I'm going to talk about that now, which is how to plan, what to see, what to do when you get out of quarantine, when you're actually in Seoul. So for me personally, I started a big Notion list, just things literally random. I think I organized it into 4 categories of food, indoor, outdoor, and experiences. All the food I wanted to eat, any restaurants that were recommended to me or that I saw on YouTube, and then everything nature-wise went into outdoor, so all the mountains and hikes and parks, and then everything that was kind of like museums or cafes went into indoor. And then in terms of experiences, it's kind of bigger things, like I want to go to the DMZ, I want to travel to see the beaches, I want to go to Jeju Island. So those kind of things went into the experiences category. And I started that probably a month in advance, and it was literally like whenever I watched any YouTube about Korea or any sort of website, I would just put in the recommendations there, and it actually created quite a big list that I still have not gone through. I think that's a really great way to organize what you want to do. So I would say you can start by looking at basic kind of touristy things. Just look up, you know, top 20 things to do in Seoul, which will usually pop up with palaces, museums, very iconic places across Seoul. But also I think that one of the things that helped me the most was looking at YouTubers and influencers and people who are genuinely living in Korea and seeing where they're going to, which is usually a lot of beautiful galleries, very aesthetic cafes, sometimes really hidden gems of parks. And you'll also be able to see some experiences that they might do, like picnicking along the Han River, or biking, or taking a ceramics class, taking a tea ceremony class, some things that you might not necessarily be aware of if you weren't a local or if you didn't actually live in Korea long enough to develop that knowledge. Then once you're actually out and about, I would recommend either Kakao Map or Naver Map. Those are the 2 main navigation systems in Korea, and they do work under English. It's a little more confusing. There might be a lot in Korean, but you can kind of like translate and try your best. Besides also having great navigation and telling you exactly when the buses are going to come and exactly when subway's arriving, they also have actually ratings and recommendations, kind of like Google Maps, of every single store or restaurant in the area. So if you look up food, you can kind of see the best food places if you're really hungry and you're just out and about. You can look up cafes, and you can see pictures of people that have been there and see what the cafe vibe is like before going. So I would say that that was actually really helpful for me when I'm actually out and about and I'm trying to decide, like, I want a coffee, I don't know which cafe to go to, then I'll usually go on Kakao Map and just look around my area and kind of click through the ratings and see which is reviewed the best. Also, a great website for food recommendations, if you're a huge foodie like me, is a website called Mango Plate. You can look up specific foods or specific areas, and then you can see the top restaurants in that area or the top restaurants for that food. I found that really useful because food is very important to me. I love food, and every meal I have had in Korea has been great. It's such a good place to eat food, street food, cheap, nice, healthy food. I would definitely recommend checking Mango Plate out and just looking, just browsing for restaurants. And just some personal tips to end this video here. First thing I would say, don't sleep on Korea's incredible nature. I feel like I was sleeping on it for most of my trips with my family. I really just like blocked out all the nature parts. But now that I'm here alone with my boyfriend, I actually have enjoyed the nature a lot more. Obviously it's spring here as well, which is such a beautiful season, but taking as much time to spend in parks. There are so many mountains here, so many beautiful hikes that are so well paved and well done, and I've really enjoyed having that time to kind of just center myself in nature. The other thing is kind of the opposite, which is don't shy away from more expensive cafes if you find them like really aesthetically pleasing, or you think that they might be a nice vibe. Things like cafes and restaurants that are kind of nicer tend to be more expensive here. However, I find that paying a little extra for the Americano or a pastry actually does lend itself to a really nice ambiance, and I am someone who really doesn't like spending a lot of money on like cafes and stuff like that, but I've enjoyed it here because the cafes are so beautiful and well maintained, and like the vibes and aesthetic of every place is different. So I would also kind of save a little bit of your budget just to maybe splurge a little bit on just that experience of sitting in a cafe, chatting with someone, reading, working, whatever. But yeah, those are all of my tips and kind of experience moving here for a couple of months. I have really enjoyed it. Still have a lot to go, and I can't wait to show you guys more of my adventures. And if you have any questions for me and my experience, leave them in the comments below. And yeah, I hope this helped, and I will see you guys next time.